Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Before I Go podcast. I want to share with you today some thoughts on the idea, the concept of therapy. And please remember, everything I share on this podcast is strictly my opinion. I don't think I've ever been opposed to therapy or counseling. I've been in therapy, and I can admit that I absolutely needed it, and I should have gone to therapy much sooner than I did. Like 30 years sooner. I have always been the strong one, thinking I can fix things on my own, never wanting to admit that I needed help, or believing that I had to be in crisis before I had to go to a therapist. If that sounds like you, I have to tell you, that kind of thinking is a huge mistake. I know that people view therapy in many different ways. Some people are completely opposed to it and feel that it is indulgent and unnecessary and, quite frankly, something that only white people do. There are Christians who believe that we are capable of simply praying our problems away. Now, I absolutely believe in prayer, but I also believe in therapy. I would go so far as to say that God can work through a therapist to get you to the healing that you need. For me, I knew I needed therapy when I noticed certain patterns in my life, patterns that were leading me down an emotional, self-destructive path. I needed to understand why I kept repeating these patterns. That's it in a nutshell. And talking to a professional who was unbiased and can look at the situation without any type of filter really helped me to sort things out. I have had a total of 3 experiences in therapy. The first was a relationship issue. The second was a relationship issue. Can you guess what the third was? If you guessed relationship issue, you are absolutely correct. And what's funny is that when I went to therapy the third time, I didn't want to be the stereotypical woman who's having problems with her man. So I told the therapist that it was something else. And it probably wasn't until the 3rd or 4th session that we started talking about relationships. And she told me that almost everything that we go through is centered around relationships. We aren't walking through this world alone. Everything that we do is affected by somebody else and is affected and we affect other people, if that makes sense. We are affected by other people and we affect other people, is my point. But anyway, the third experience was based on a relationship as well. The first experience, which was more than 20 years ago, lasted about 2 sessions. The second, which was 2 years later, about 18 years ago, was maybe 2 or 3 months. I honestly don't recall. The third experience started September of 2019 and ended in July 2020, so about 10 months. The third time was definitely the charm for several reasons. Number one, I was mature enough to receive therapy. Therapy cannot work unless you are ready for it. It can't be forced. You have to be ready for it. Number two, I actually wanted to change. I wanted to make changes. People say that change is difficult. It's not difficult when you really want to, when you're ready to do the work. And number three, like I said, I wanted to understand the why behind what was actually happening. In hindsight, I believe when I sought therapy the first 2 times, I was just looking for someone to agree with everything I said and to validate me. I was the person who actually believed I knew everything, and no one could tell me anything. Can you imagine living your life that way? Maybe that's you right now. I don't know. It wasn't until I was in my late 40s or early 50s that I could admit I didn't know everything, and getting another person's perspective was not only smart, but necessary. Last year when I found my therapist, I was willing to open up and be vulnerable. Not on the first visit. It took a few sessions. It took a few sessions for me to really be honest. And once that happened, the floodgates opened, and there was a clear path to healing. Things came up that I had long since buried, and one thing I learned is that if you don't deal with the issues in your life, they do not just go away, my friend. They will manifest in other unhealthy ways. Now, without going into too much detail, I'll give you an example. I've talked about this before on other platforms, so this isn't new information. I've been married and divorced twice. Actually, my first marriage was annulled because my first husband married me when he wasn't legally free to do so. In other words, when he married me, he was still married to his first wife. When I found out about this, I was a few months pregnant with my son because I wanted to get pregnant right away. I had the marriage annulled immediately and never looked back. Afterward, my focus was 100% on having a healthy pregnancy, and I did not deal with the devastation of the broken marriage. I never grieved that relationship. I pretended like it never happened. After all, that is the definition of an annulment. It never happened. The truth is, it did happen. There's a book that my therapist told me about. It was called The Body Keeps the Score, or something like that. The body knows the score. And it's like, even if I convinced my mind that that marriage never happened, my body knew it. My body knew it. And it was manifested. It was manifesting that trauma for 30 years. So, after I got the marriage annulled, after 2 years, I got married again. And I unconsciously brought all of that unresolved trauma into my second marriage. And inevitably, it also ended. No surprise there. Unresolved trauma does not just go away. It has to be dealt with. It took 30 years for me to realize that, but it didn't have to. It wasn't just the trauma of the broken marriage, but also my inability to show weakness, which will be discussed in a later episode. This is why I am an advocate for therapy. I don't think you have to have a specific quote-unquote issue to seek out counseling. It could be just an opportunity to check in with someone, to talk things out. Someone that is outside your circle that can provide you with sound feedback. But if there is a specific issue, then in my opinion, getting professional help is the way to go. You don't have to face your issues alone. Why would you want to? That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for listening. Before I go, let me share this with you from Rob Reiner. Rob says, everybody talks about wanting to change things and help and fix, but ultimately, all you can do is fix yourself. Because if you can fix yourself, it has a ripple effect. I'll see you next time.